Oh, hello there, wherever you're listening, however you're listening, joining us live on the Reality After Show YouTube channel or on my personal Twitter account at Gabe Ortiz. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can't wait to get into tonight's episode. And we're going to have a guest tonight, which is going to be really fun. Not going to tell you who it is. You got to stick around until around 7:30 when they join us, but they're going to be helping us break down the topic of the evening. If you saw the title when you join, you already know where we're going with that. But before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Make sure you leave your comments, questions, concerns, roast, praise, whatever it may be in the comment section. Always like to leave a little bit of time at the end to do some Q&A. And you can also join in on the conversation that we're going to be talking about tonight. And I know that this is going to be one where a lot of people are going to have a lot of different thoughts, ideas, and suggestions for the topic of the evening. So please do not be a stranger in the comment section. If you've seen the title of tonight's episode, then you know we're going to be talking about second seasons, players that have gone onto the show, performed however they performed, and came back for a second season. And within that microcosm of Survivor, there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of ugly. So I'm very excited to kind of get into those three categories and start breaking it all down right now. Like I said, go ahead and leave some of the good, some of the bad, and some of the ugly from your perspective, from the fans. And I think there will probably be some space in this conversation. We'll hold space in this conversation for some of the good, bad, and ugly outside of the game of Survivor. But for right now, I want to stick with things that happened on the island. So some of the easy layup goods, right? Like some of the people that I think everybody, when they think about this topic, the very first names that pop into their head. I think that the top of the list for the bump from first season to second season is going to be one of the pantheon members of Survivor, of course, Parvati Shallow. Now, she comes in Cook Islands and is quite a character, right? I don't think anybody would deny that Parvati Shallow, maybe not the main character or one of the main characters, rather, of Cook Islands, but certainly somebody that a lot of people left that season for a multitude of reasons, saying, man, she was really interesting. She was very fun to watch. But I think her game was very raw and undeveloped in Cook Islands, as I think many first-time players are. And I think that she leaned a lot, obviously, on her charm. She leaned a lot on how under the radar she was able to float throughout that game. And the bonds that she made, particularly with some of the guys, Nate and Adam stick out to me, but didn't actually have any meaningful control of the game, particularly the deeper she got into Cook Islands, and obviously didn't really have much of a resume outside of those bonds that she formed. But when she comes back just a few seasons later onto Micronesia Fans versus Favorites, not only does she have more strategic acumen, not only is she more than an under the radar social player, but she becomes the ringleader of the entire season and properly cements herself into the all-time legacy of Survivor. And that is, as good of a jump as I think you can possibly have in a game of Survivor. And I start with Parvati, not because I think that she is like a particularly interesting one. It's something that's been talked about a whole lot to death. There's nothing new that I can say about Parvati Shallow, but I bring her up to start as kind of a baseline, right? Like that, in my opinion, is as good as it can possibly go from your first time to your second time, where you come on your first time, you're an interesting character that captures people's attention, captures people's eyes, but you don't really make too big of a splash, right? And I think that if you're going to have the ideal jump from the first season to the second season, that's a critical part of it. That like you can't go out and win your first time. Your jump is either the bar for you coming back has to be you go win again and become one of the best players ever. And that's damn near impossible. We've only seen it happen twice, and the second time it happened, it was not consecutive seasons of returning. It took 3 seasons for Tony to do it. But I would also say that, and this might be a bit of a hot take, I think I would rather have the journey that Parvati had from Cook Islands to Micronesia than the journey that Sandra had from Pearl Islands to Heroes versus Villains. And if that's a hot take, let me know. But the reason I say that is because there was so much growth for Parvati as a character from her first game to her second game. There was so much adaptability and clear knowledge that she soaked up from her first game to her second game. And like, that's the ideal hero's journey of Survivor, is that you go out your first time and you fall short, but you're interesting enough that people are like, I want to see more from that person. That's the sweet spot. That's where I think you want to be if you don't go win your first season, is be somebody that the people are left wanting more of. And it's very difficult to do that if you win, obviously. It's very difficult to do that as a finalist. And I don't even mean in the final 2 or the final 3, but in like the final 5, because oftentimes your story is very complete. You've had a lot of time to tell your story. You've had a lot of time to show what you have to offer as a Survivor player. But if you go out a bit earlier than that, I think all of a sudden you have a bit of more mystery behind you. You have questions that the fans want to be answered. And that's important. And for Parvati to find herself after Cook Islands in that realm of like, I'd like to see this person back. I don't think they were the best player on their season, but there's questions I want to have answered about this person. What would it be like if they made it further? What would they look like with a full game of Survivor experience under their belt if they were to come back? And then when you get that opportunity, you come back and you not just win, but you win in very flashy, dominating Mount Rushmore fashion. Like, that's the hero's journey of Survivor. If you could have any kind of journey on Survivor, I would be hard pressed to be convinced that any journey is better than that. So I use Parvati as a baseline there for that reason, because I don't think it can get much better than that. There are people who I think come close. There are people who come very far from close, and we're going to get into some of those as well. And any minute now, our guest for the evening should be joining us. So to look at somebody else, and this is my personal favorite Survivor player of all time, who I think is like pretty close to Parvati in that hero's journey of being a returning player and coming back. And that's Jeremy Collins. I mean, that like this guy comes out in his first go, a blood versus water season, and his whole deal was, I want to go out and I want to be a challenge beast. I want to go out. I'm an arena football player. I'm going to dominate everybody in the challenges. And that's exactly what he was. And oftentimes you see those people end up exactly where Jeremy did in his first run, the first member of the jury. And to see what he brought in strategic acumen, in innovation for the game of Survivor in Cambodia, I mean, other than Parvati, I can't think of another player that had more growth from their first season to their second season. But I'll tell you what, that's my favorite player of all time. I've talked about him a whole lot on this show. Let's bring in another voice to tonight's episode. He's going to hang out with us till around 8 p.m. tonight, and we're going to break down way more of the good, the bad, and the ugly of second seasons of Survivor. The one and only mastermind of season 47, Andy Rueda. Andy, how we doing, buddy?
Bro, big fan of the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have you here. You are the second guest I've ever had on the show. I don't count Johnny Fairplay because he puts on the show. So you were the second guest I've ever had of the show. And the first one was Teeny Chirchillo, who had a fantastic appearance. But you were somebody who I always knew that it was going to be on the show as one of the early guests. So as you saw in the title, as I've told everybody already, the theme of tonight's episode, the topic of tonight's episode is second seasons, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I've kind of laid the framework of what I think the best possible second season journey can be for a Survivor player. I think the two people that jump to my mind are Parvati Shallow and Jeremy Collins. I don't think it gets much better than what those two did from their first season to their second, where the first time around, interesting players, captivating characters, but left the people wanting a lot more. And the second time they come back and they dominate their way to a win. What's your take on the ideal hero's journey of a Survivor character from season 1 to season 2?
Yeah, those are two like huge examples in the positive direction. So I heard you talking about Parvati. That is all true. I think the one thing to note about Parvati is that going into her first season, she didn't know shit about Survivor. She had no idea. She had never watched a show. It was something that she was winging, something that she signed up for. And the fact that she did moderately well in her first season, I think goes to show the special sauce that she has for the game. I was lucky enough to just very briefly meet her earlier this month. She's one of those people you hear about a lot. Like, maybe I'm biased because I've seen her on TV a lot, but like she commands a presence as soon as she walks in, right?
Sure.
She has that. She has the effervescent charm, and she has a mind for the game. So I think the reason she is probably one of the gold standards of someone who comes in and dominates their second time is that she had a chance to sort of like learn about the game. And I think that like, so that introduces, when I was thinking about this, I feel like there are two themes to anyone coming back for a second time. And I think what's interesting is that it's universal, no matter who you are, no matter how you played the first time. I think the first theme is the concept of adaptation, like adapting, right?
Sure.
Because no matter what you did the first time, right? There's this built-in pressure as a returning player to, can you do it again? Can you either prove yourself in a way you haven't before, or can you, sort of recreate the magic? And I think that's what's cool about a returning player season. That's why we've been wanting it for like years, is because those stakes are really high, because it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you played three or four times and you've proven all you could prove. If you play one more time and you're the first boot, like it affects your legacy, right? So it's like a high pressure situation. And so I think any player coming in for a second time, they have to answer that pivotal question. It's like, how are you going to change your game? How are you going to adapt with the experience that you have? And so I think that's something we could track in, because it could go either way. Some people take that and run with it. Some people, it sort of leads to a much worse result than when they were just kind of playing.
That's why I think, for their first go around, like Parvati and Jeremy found themselves in a sweet spot where all those questions you laid out that need to be answered, I think in an ideal world, you want those questions to be as light as possible. Like if you're like, a Johnny Fairplay, for instance, I know he loves watching the show, so sorry, Johnny, in advance. But if you're a Johnny, for instance, and you come in third and you're, arguably the main character of your season, the question of can you do it again is so much heavier than like for a Parvati in her first season, where it's like, can you do it again? All right, well, what did she really do the first time? It was like, I'm figuring out what the hell I'm even doing out here on the fly. And I was just somebody that was fun to watch on TV. She wasn't the mastermind that we know her as today. And so Sandra, I think, is the only person who's really truly cashed out on going into her second season with the question of being like, can you go win again? And then for her to deliver, it's like, okay, you're in the conversation to be the greatest player of all time. But we've seen so many people fail to answer that question. And so, I know that you had some names on your mind of people who had a lot of questions going in. This can kind of get into the bad part of coming back for your first returnee season. Who were some of the names that like had questions going into their season of, can they do it again? Will they be as exciting? Will they have adapted their game in a positive way that you think fell short of that mark?
Well, it's interesting thinking about that direction, like going in a second time and basically harming your legacy with, how you've decided to play the second time. I think that the very famous example, the one everyone would point to, is JT. Now,
Sure.
it's interesting talking about JT because honestly, he comes into Token Cheese and he plays literally the perfect game, like sort of by definition, right?
Yeah.
And he just really made a name for himself in playing a really clean game in terms of being on the right side of the votes, having agency, having the perfect duo with Steven, and sitting there and getting all of the votes from the jury. So it basically could not have gone better. But he is someone who was in position to go back, right like that very next year. And the thing is, I agreed with how he saw it going in, which was I already won. Like, I want to flex muscles I haven't flexed yet. I want to be
Yeah.
creative. I want to make a name for myself across a whole different new dimension. I want to be making bigger moves. I want to be making bolder moves. I want to prove that I can do that. Now, this is something I agree with. I think that's if you play Survivor once and you win, and you're asked to play again, you have to think about like, what makes it worth it? Like, what is my goal? Obviously, you want to win more money, but like just beyond that, like what's in it for me?
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I mean, or maybe partial disclosure, this is something I was thinking about a lot this year, and then I abruptly stopped thinking about it. But
Sure.
um,
And then you started drinking again.
yeah, yeah. But so JT, I think he comes in actually with the right mentality, but what that led to was him taking massive swings, giant swings, right? Trying to sort of dominate the game in a much more sort of creative and explosive way.
Yeah.
And the results just, he experienced what could go wrong and something that he
Sure.
didn't experience the first time. That's
Yeah.
another theme is like, there's this idea, which I think has validity, which is, hey, let's say you play your first game and whether you win or you lose, you were never blindsided. You were always on the right side of the votes. That's all you know in Survivor. You never experienced the other side of it. And so you've never experienced the taste of something going wrong. Whereas other players, people who have, expanded upon their legacy and improved their games, they have that sort of robust foundation. They know what it feels like for it to go wrong. And maybe they have the ability to sort of, tinker with their game and sort of like protect against that in the second time. But with JT, I mean, then he plays a third time and it doesn't go well either. He's the classic example of, basically, can you do it again? And he goes and tries to do it, and his as a result, his legacy is not where it was coming out of Token Cheese. But like I said, like I don't know. I think it's a little bit overblown, just like how much of a terrible player some people claim he is. I just
Yeah.
think that that's what he was going for, as like a means of building his legacy. But I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts? So like he plays the perfect game and then sort of arguably flames out.
Yeah, I think that he went in with this idea of exactly like you said. I want to show people that my toolkit is deeper than what a lot of people think it is. That I can get into the dirty part of Survivor, and things broke very very well for him his first time out, and I think that he was at a big disadvantage for the exact reason you said, that it was like this. Well, I don't know how to deal with the crisis situation,
Mm.
because from what we see on TV, he never really had a crisis situation in his first season. And the ability to navigate crisis and the ability to deal with the realization that people are lying to you, that people aren't working towards what your ultimate goals are, short and long term in the game, like that in of itself is a skill. And that's something that can be developed over the course of a season. If you find yourself in a place where it's like, oh, things, something that you have a lot of experience with, things aren't really going my way here, and to come out the other side of that in a better position than when things started going south for you, like that is a skill. And I don't think JT ever had to develop that. And I think that this is just a life thing too. I don't even think it's a Survivor thing, but I think that, when things go well for you in any kind of endeavor, you kind of get used to the idea that they're always going to go well for you. When I go and I do this again, whatever it may be, in this case, Survivor, like, of course things are going to go good for me, because why wouldn't they? I already did this and they all went great for me. And so I think JT went out there with the expectation of I can play looser and things will continue to break in my way. And when they didn't, when they stopped breaking in his way, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know how to navigate this. And then, he gets blindsided and he gets voted out. Now, all of that to say, JT, I think, left a great mark on his time in Heroes versus Villains. Like he was so excited to
Yeah,
watch,
for sure.
and was bursting with personality. Gives the note to Russell Hantz, which is somebody who I think is a fascinating character on this topic that we'll get into in a bit here. But like I think he did a lot with his short amount of time in Heroes versus Villains. And I don't think he was ever in a position where he was going to go win the game.
Yeah.
So I don't think that he deserves to be slammed as like a bad player. I think he's in a very unique and tough spot to come back and play Survivor again and be successful with it. I think it's such a tough spot because he had such a perfect game the first time out, and because what made him successful in the first game, I think, was the fact that people didn't really know him,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's like, if I know that you're gonna hit me with some Southern boy charm and a nice smile, like I'm not gonna fall for that when I know that it's happening. I'm not gonna let you get away with that if I know that's what you're trying to do.
Well, you say that, right? But he had a great start on that Heroes tribe.
He
So
did it.
was
He
able
did.
to overcome that, and it really was his own, I guess you could say, foibles that cost him. Although even the move that everyone talks about, even the terrible idea to send the letter to Russell, whatever, I always looked at it as just a big gamble.
In a vacuum, it's not a bad idea. Like what other read are you going to have on that situation if you're on the outside looking in? One guy, a bunch of girls, obviously he's going to go next. And if to your point, it's a huge gamble if it works.
Yeah. And in that time of history, sort of the merge vote was important like that. And like the sort of quest to have the numbers in that merge vote, like the stakes were really that high. So I've never hated that. I just know from a sort of third party standpoint, that's like the clear example of someone who basically harmed their legacy, especially after having won the first time. But I think what that does is I think that puts kind of the fear in the hearts of other players who've had great times in their first time.
Yeah.
The fear of going back again and doing that damage, just like, I mean, whatever, in the public discourse, which is whatever. But I think another good example, maybe not as talked about, because I do think she played a good game her second time, but it is still worth noting, is Kim Spradlin. So
sure.
Here's the deal with Kim Spradlin, just like a walk through memory lane, right? She plays on One World season 24, right? And she definitely has a dominant strategic win and physical win and social win, like definitely. But she was not the most extravagant character on that season.
Yeah.
And the season itself was not received particularly well by the fans, not received particularly well by production. And I think people just noted that she was a strong winner, but like her legacy wasn't all that grand coming out of One World because people just wanted to forget about it. And Philippines came around, was a much better season, much more well-received season. But the thing about Kim is that over the next decade, like she took on the cult classic status, like among all like the super fans, right?
Yeah.
And I think literally Rob as a podcast did a lot of work in making her legacy just age like fine wine and like compound build over time, where it reached this peak where, again, this is not what people were talking about in 2013, no, maybe earlier, whenever One World was.
2011, 2012. It was something in that span, like early 2010s. Yeah.
Right. So that it was what it was in 2011. By the time Winners of War is coming around, she is placed as one of, if not the best player of all time.
Yeah.
And so her legacy just took on this whole new, heights. And from what I remember from the preseason and stuff, like this is like definitely on her mind. She's like, everybody thinks I'm a perfect Survivor player.
Yeah.
And like, if I go back again, it's only going to go worse. Like, yeah, like the probability that it goes better.
And that was something she acknowledged in pregame.
Well, I think what's great about Kim Spradlin, I think what makes her a great player is I do think she's got just a high level of awareness, and she had that sort of idea, but I do think it could possibly have gotten in her head a little bit, such that she did not have a good start on Winners of War, like socially. And I think it was like a self-fulfilling thing. Like her threat level had gained steam and was gigantic by the time Winners of War came around. And she found herself in a really rocky situation on her original tribe from a strategic standpoint and a social standpoint. And it just really wasn't looking good for her. She got on her feet and she found inroads and she like made a good run. I think she played definitely fine on Winners of War.
Yeah.
But I think that just goes to show that like not only are you battling what the players like think about you based off of your first time. You're battling that. You're battling sort of the pressure of living up to like a stellar first time around. Now, not everyone, that doesn't apply to everyone, because if we want to go back to Parvati and we want to go back to Jeremy, I think something else that like ties them together is another thing a pattern we observe is, and then there are other big names to talk about here, people who had something to prove after their first time, and they were like lucky to get a second chance.
Sure.
Like Parvati more that so than Jeremy. I think Jeremy, people wanted to see him again. Parvati snuck into Micronesia, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember that was somebody where everyone was kind of like, like, what? How did that happen? You know?
Yeah, and I love looking at this from a historian point of view, because like that's weird to think about now. And then Boston Rob snuck on the All Stars. You know, and I think that when you think of your second time, like all the things that Kim Spradlin was battling, all that stuff is just like you're not battling if you are that type of player going into a second time. And almost to, and I'll get your thoughts on this, but like almost to sort of, I don't like it when a cast is made up of like a Game Changers type composition where it's giant threats and people who are very small threats, because it is inequitable in the sense that I think if you were Sarah Lucina, I think you had a big advantage based off of your threat level compared to like literally Tony Vlachos, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's
or
like
Sandra or JT, like, you know, there's a whole list of people that we could go through on Game Changers. I think that's one of the reasons why that season wasn't very well received, was because you had a lot of these people who, you know, didn't warrant excitement, but just, you know, people weren't really looking at when that cast came out. And then it's like all of a sudden those are the people that end up running the game for the most part. And I think that, again, like, where is that sweet spot of coming back for your second season? Like, I don't think that it's being a nobody, you know, and I don't use that word harshly, but just for lack of a better term, I don't think that the best place to be is somebody who has zero threat level, who isn't talked about at all. But it's also not being a winner. It's also not being a finalist. Like, I think that you are set up for so much failure when you do that, with one exception in the history of the show, which is Sandra, who managed to go back and win. And, you know, the rest is history. But you got to be on the show for a little bit. First off, you know, you have to have probably 2 months or so of being on your season to have room to grow and have some mystery. Like, that was something I was talking about a bit before you came on, was that I think it's best to have a lot of unanswered questions about your game going into your second season that go beyond just like, can you go win again? You know, like, man, what would it look like if Parvati did find an idol? What would it look like if Jeremy leaned more on strategy than on his physical acumen? You know, and this is something that a little bird told me. I'm sure you can put the puzzle pieces together for who gave me a lot of this info. But when Jeremy was being casted on to his first season, his whole thing was like, I'm going out there to win challenges. Like, I'm a football player. My only goal here is I want to go win challenges, and that's it. And like all the strategy stuff, it won't matter because I'm not losing any challenges. And it was like, all right, dude, like, we really like you, but like, we'll see how it goes. And a big reason of why Val, his wife, ended up going out with him. Originally, he really wanted it to be his brother. And they ended up interviewing his brother a couple times, didn't really like him. But I think what it was more than anything was that it's like, oh, if we just put another Jeremy out here, then it's just going to be like football player central. And that's all we're going to get out of casting this guy on the show. If we put his wife out there, we're going to get some emotion out of this guy. We're going to get some concern. We're going to get some anxiety out of this guy. You know, like, we're going to see more than just the fact that he spends a lot of time in the gym. And that, I think, like, left a lot of questions in people's minds of like, okay, I can see like the mold of a great Survivor player in this guy, but some new things need to come out to bring out the best in what he has to offer. And that's the kind of like mystery that I'm talking about.
I think Jeremy was in a really good place going to Cambodia in terms of how he was perceived.
Oh, great. As good of a place as I think you can be.
Massive. And I think that type of thing really sets you up to go on a run and actually win your second time. I think there's one other person who that really applies to, and this person was set up super well. And it really is kind of like the dream scenario when you want to come back. And that's Cochran. So he was on Southeast, and was obviously a major part of the storyline, but unless you had crazy revisionist history, like he was not the best strategic player on that season, or like
Yeah.
mastermind. He didn't go extremely far. He was just the main character. And I think one of the themes was like he was likable and a huge likable underdog because he was kind of not being treated right by his tribe mates. At least that was the perception.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the really the best case scenario going into your next season, where you didn't win, you're not a nobody, you're just someone where people are like, I like that guy. Like
Yeah,
I would
right.
see you
Yeah.
on my TV screen.
Yeah.
And I think that's what set him up super well. And I also want to give him a ton of credit for adapting his game. And it's one of my favorite returning player stories because I think he went on an arc in South Pacific and he really sort of demonstrated that and solidified it in Karamoan. And he had, the start of a South Pacific game, ton of anxiety, ton of, of course I can relate, that. But
Yeah.
and then going into Karamoan, like he was set up well in this like weird favorites tribe, but also very calm and felt very in control and felt like he learned his lessons.
And I think a lot of what you mentioned applies to his fellow players too, of, people being like, hey, like everyone seems to kind of like this guy. And if you're a player on that season, when you watched his season on TV, it's like, oh, I like that guy. And your mentality going in is like, oh, I can't wait to chat with Cochran.
Yeah.
Like that's the perfect mindset, the perfect perception you want to have is like, I'm not worried about him. He's not a nobody. Like, oh, I can't wait to get to know this guy.
Yeah.
And it gives you so much room to just play, to, kind of be this guy or this player rather that can float around, make relationships. No one's really looking at you a certain way because you're doing that. And it gives you so much freedom to spread your wings and really test things out, fail with a bit of a safety net that people will still want to keep you around because they like having you around just as a buddy, as a person. Like, yeah, I would say that's, to your point, probably the best positioned player going into their second season. I mean, I put Jeremy and Parvati up there, but if I had to pick one, I probably end up going with Cochran. I want to get into some of the ugly here, and I think maybe the most damaging legacy second season for any player, in my opinion, is somebody that we mentioned earlier. I think it's Russell, who went made it all the way to the end, came in second in Heroes versus Villains.
Yeah.
But what his second season did for his legacy was, for many people, not everybody, there are still plenty of Russell truthers out there to this day, many more after the conclusion of Heroes versus Villains. But what it did for a lot of people, and what I think stuck throughout, the history of the show up to today, is it confirmed for a lot of people this guy could never win the game. And like that, can you have a worse label on you if you're somebody who your aspiration is to go win Survivor, is to be told, I don't think you could ever win Survivor, no matter who you play with? Because coming out of Samoa, I think, the widely held perception was like, oh, he got robbed. Like this was just a fluke. And if he were to, play 100 times and make it back 100 times, he's winning the majority of those games. And to then go back on Heroes versus Villains, be the main character of the season again in back-to-back seasons, and now you're playing on, what many people would say the best cast ever assembled, and you make it all the way to the end, and you have big moves and a big personality, and to lose again to another seemingly under-the-radar type player, like that was so damaging to his legacy that I don't know if there was a player that was more underserved, I guess, or done dirty by their second game than Russell Hantz. And I find it ironic because he made it all the way to the end and was the main character again. Like,
Yeah.
what do you make of what Heroes versus Villains did in its totality for Russell's legacy?
Well, it's really interesting because I think that's a valid point. Like in the long run, is probably the worst thing for his legacy. But what it did was completely solidify and crystallize that legacy that he had in Samoa.
Sure, yeah.
The same exact thing happened, right? And obviously, Russell is such an interesting case for many different reasons. Like obviously, he is one of these rare cases where he comes back right away to play a second time without having, people on Heroes vs. Villains had no idea what he was about in his first time. But I think it's this really big trade-off because I think as much as that was an advantage for him, I think that it really, to your point, I think it really pays if someone does have some time in between, some time and space to study the game tape and
Yeah.
really have an idea of what they did right, what went wrong. And I think it's a wild sort of scenario we'll never see of like a hypothetical where he had some time and then played after everyone had seen him, because he was a big bombastic villainous player, 100%. Like that would have given him a huge target, as we saw in Redemption Island.
Sure.
But he was also like, he won fan favorite, you know what I mean? So it could have maybe have gone either way. Whereas what actually happened was he went in, learned zero lessons from the Samoa because he had the same playbook, and it
Yeah.
worked out in ways because he was able to get to the end, but with less jury equity than even in Samoa. And so
Yeah, which is hard to do because people really did not want to vote for him in Samoa,
yeah,
and people wanted to vote for him even less in Heroes versus Villains.
yeah,
And I think one of the big reasons why, to your point, it was a disadvantage for him to go out so fast is because he had such a clean slate with everybody from a personality perspective. I
mm,
almost think it might have helped him a bit more had everybody seen his season, been like, okay, this guy's kind of an asshole, but then go in with that expectation of like, he's going to be an asshole. And I think a lot of people were probably thrown where it's like, I don't know anything about this guy. Let's get to know him.
yeah.
Oh my God, he's unbearable. Like to have to figure that out on the island is so different than going in being like, I know what kind of guy this is gonna be.
Right.
And when your expectations are lowered by so much, then there's a greater opportunity for people to be kind of pleasantly surprised and like, oh, he's not as bad as he was on TV, you know. Oh, he's just a normal guy, like whatever. But to go in to a Russell Hands game and be like, I got no idea what to expect from this dude, and then all of a sudden it's like,
Yeah.
oh my, he's so terrible. Like I thought he was gonna just be a regular guy like everybody else out here is, and he's so unbearable. I think that that's so damaging to the potential and like kind of getting back to what we were saying about Cochran, the freedom you have to play.
Mhm.
Like, I think that Russell had a lot of freedom in the sense that nobody knew what he was about, so he could go back to his old playbook and implement the same strategies that worked very well for him to get deep into the game. But I think it also was like, you don't really have a whole lot of breathing room when it comes to winning people over. Like,
Yeah.
your first impression to everybody is so terrible that it's not going to give you a lot of space to change that perception over the course of the game while also implementing the strategies that you use to win. Like they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Like the way that he plays the game is kind of as a bad dude from a strategy perspective. And then but there are plenty of people who play like that, but in real life and socially are perfectly fine people.
Right.
And he kind of leans into the bad dude for both socially and strategically. And that's a very difficult thing to do and go win. And Heroes versus Villains, I think, for him and for a lot of people who were fans of his after watching Samoa, was an opportunity to redeem that failure and
Mm.
say, like, no, 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 no. You can be the big bad wolf strategically and socially and win the game. And that felt like it cemented the idea that you can't do that. And then he goes out on Redemption Island and, flames out in the very beginning. And then it's like legacy done. Like
Well,
that's where his legacy ends.
it's interesting what he didn't benefit from in Heroes vs. Villains, although he did have this opportunity in Redemption Island. But what he didn't benefit from was, like I said, this is another big theme that I like, that is like sort of universal to most returning players, is like you go out there your first time and you're just pure. You have no legacy. You're like a
Yeah.
first time player. You just do your thing. Things happen. You make decisions. And if you're lucky enough, you build some type of legacy. You seize the day. You seize your like first opportunity. You build some type of legacy where you could go back. But what happens most of the time is then you come back home and then the season airs. And whether or not you were able to predict what the fans were going to think, like, they have a reaction and an impression of you that is sort of like solidified by the consensus discourse. And I think that big feedback loop, I think influences so many players that they go out in their second time. Now, it's not just like what they feel like they learned out there, but what they have learned, what the fans have responded to about
Yeah.
them, and what like their sort of like things that went wrong for them, or like things that they like about someone. That plays a huge role. And I think most returning player seasons, I think it gets in their head probably for the worse for the most part, but maybe sometimes for the better, where it's just like someone's like second time and third time is really less pure because they're operating off of fan feedback. I
Yeah,
think.
like whether they lean in or want to change what that feedback is.
Right. And I think it's good to learn from that and like make a big change. I don't really like when players lean into their old hits and trying to like
Yeah,
recreate
sure.
notes. Like I think, for example, Rupert has like diminishing returns in terms of like his character, even not even just his game, but like his character, because I feel like I don't know him, whatever, but it seems like he kind of bought his own hype as he kept returning, right? And
Oh,
so
for sure.
I liked it a lot better when players at least try to take that feedback and again adapt. Not just like to better their own games, but to subvert the perception that the other players must have of them going in. And I think as a returning player, I think that there are a lot of examples, but there's a very pivotal period of time in the game, your second time around. I think it's the first 2 days where you have the opportunity to like make a second chance at making a first impression and either confirm or subvert the baggage that people have about you. Now,
Yeah.
I could think of a lot of examples, but one that pops to my mind is Cass. Now, Cass was on second chances, didn't go as far as her second time, but I think she had a good start as well. There's one scene that I think is a go-to example when you're thinking about how to like build on your game and adapt given the feedback. And this is this one scene where she's making something on the beach, and Kelly Wentworth wakes up and sees her and thinks that she's making a fake idol. And Cass is like, no, like I'll show you later or whatever. And so Wentworth is like really suspicious about it. But then Cass later comes and it's a birthday gift for Kelly Wentworth. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is not the Cass that I thought. Like, this is not the Cass that I watched on Kagiyan. I
Yeah.
think it was a really good start for her. Maybe that was at the swap, whatever. It doesn't like it was a good pre-merge for her. It just didn't go right at the merge with the numbers or whatever. But I think that's what you like if you're a first time player trying to like build upon your game. I think you have to go in that direction. I think you have to have a level of awareness about how you played, given your own opinion, what people think about it, and what people think about you, and then sort of outsmart that and subvert that.
Yeah, and that's as good of an example as I think you could point to for somebody who subverted their expectations going into their second season
Yeah.
off the bat. And I think something that you mentioned that I think is fascinating is you don't have a lot of time to do that. If you fall into your old tricks early on, no matter what you do afterwards, that's always what you're gonna be, you
Abby
know?
Maria. Now, this is pro Abby Maria podcast, of course.
Very pro Abby Maria
Pro Abby
podcast.
Maria
But
podcast.
we're also a pro honesty podcast.
She was on that same season. She was on Cambodia Second Chances. And in the first 2 days, that pivotal period of time, she gets into some trivial drama about
She opens up with an argument with PG about a bracelet being stolen.
and so in that moment,
It's like,
everyone's
oh,
this
same
is
old Abby Maria.
this is Abby Maria that we thought we'd be playing with. And so I think that's a very pivotal period of time. Like your first.
No, I totally agree. And everyone's kind of wondering, like, how are they going to attack it? You know, as from fans and I guess players as well. But for the purposes of this conversation, fans are wondering how are they going to attack this? Like they're back out here, and it's like, oh, Abby Maria is still the same. And then every Wednesday night that you tune in, you go into that episode with the expectation of like same old Abby Maria, same old Abby Maria. Whereas Cass, on the other hand, the other side of that coin is like Cass really shocked me that first episode. Wonder what she's going to do this week. I think that's where you want people's mindset to be going into your second season is like, ooh, what are they going to do this week? Not like, oh, it's more of the same. And some people like more of the same. And that works for a lot of people. I think it worked great for Abby Maria, to be honest. Like, you know, people can't get enough of her just like spitting fire on the beach. That's awesome. But I think it's more captivating and it builds your legacy more. If this is a conversation about legacy, I think it does add more to your legacy to have people be like, wow, I wonder how they're going to shock me this week. That's a good place to be. And somebody you mentioned, this is the last person I want to talk about before we get out of here, is Kelly Wentworth. I think that's somebody that had tons of evolution from being a borderline invisible character in their first season to now being one of the biggest names in the community. Like, what's your assessment of Kelly Wentworth from
Yeah.
season 29 to Second Chances.
Well, we do talk about the inherent advantage that you have if you are a lower threat level going in, but
Yeah.
I think Kelly Wentworth really seized that and took advantage of that in a like a more captivating way than most, right? And I think, again, going back down memory lane, she did not get a big edit on San Juan del Sur, but she was this real low key like fan favorite in the super fan community. She was very active online at the time. She was like, different parts of her personality were shown, and she won a bunch of people over. Now let's talk about it from different meta perspectives. That was the first step to like transforming her legacy, because she, squeaked in getting enough votes to get on.
Yeah.
And I think that internet sort of campaign helped. But I think that despite the advantages she may have had by being a smaller target, I think the way that she hit the ground running and really, to me, and what I liked about Kelly Wentworth is, I mean, we talk about like your different perceptions of you and how you play off of that. But what I loved about Kelly Wentworth is like, it felt like intrinsic. Like I have all this to prove to myself.
Yeah.
I have all this that I know I'm capable of, that it didn't work out in San Juan del Sur. She had to play with her dad, etc. Blah, blah, blah. It's like the sort of the perfect second chance story, right? And the way that she hit the ground running was, again, like this is like a dream example, because then she goes on to play an incredible game, like definitely like one of the fan favorites of the season.
Yeah.
And her legacy, again, speaking of like compounding legacy, it's really just grown. Her legacy is
it keeps, like it's almost like a balloon. It just like every time it's just like she plays, it's just like a big like into the balloon, and it just gets bigger and bigger.
And
And
to go from the San Juan del Sur to literally being like probably the top, considered one of like the two biggest women to like ever play the game.
Yeah.
Like it depends on how you talk about it, because obviously there's the Mount Rushmore that includes Sandra and Suri and Parvati, but Kelly Wentworth is like, when there's a new cast, like who do you want to play like Kelly Wentworth is like,
one of the most talked about names. Or even somebody, she's played what, 3 times now?
Yeah.
I think that's somebody that people aren't sick of either. Like,
I wish she was on 50.
Right. Like the 3 names that you just mentioned, Parvati, Suri, Sandra, like people, and this is no disrespect, I don't even think this is a bad thing, but I think people are kind of sick of seeing them now. Like, and 3 times is a lot of times to play. And I don't think anybody would be upset if Kelly Wentworth was on 50 or was on any returning season moving forward. And I think that is also a big statement of like how much people really cherish that legacy and her time on the show, is like the fact that people are like, no, we want more of this, and we've already gotten a lot of it. That's a very tough thing to do. It's a very tough thing to do for some of the most, pantheon level players of this game. And Wentworth is at the top of the list when it comes to people, when it comes to players that people want to see more of. Like, and she's already done so much. And if you were to say when San Juan del Sur ended, like, hey, this is what people are going to think of this person in 10 years, 15 years, most people would be like, you're actually crazy. You're a psycho. It's going to take so much for her to get to that point. And yet she achieved that. And I think that she's another great example of just like it going as good as it could possibly go for you.
And for me, on a deeper level, like that's like the dream, like that's the beauty of returning player seasons. And I think Survivor, is at its ultimate, it's at its best when it has figured out the cadence of new player seasons and returning player seasons.
Yeah.
Right clip, because that is when legacies can build. That's when like these multi-season arcs and storylines can occur. And so I really just hope that season 50 is the start of that, and it's going to be fascinating. Based on everything we said, like I think there are 24 new case studies to talk about, like
which is going to be awesome.
Yeah,
which is going to be awesome to break down. We got to do 49 first. Don't show any disrespect to the last of the 40s. That's our realm, the 40s, and they're the capstone for it. So we gotta. I don't know if I use that word correctly, but they're the end. They're the ribbon of the end of the 40s. But no, your point's very well taken. That 50 is going to be like, we're going to be able to have 24 new conversations to have on this very topic for 50, and that's going to be awesome. I'll tell you what, we went about 10 minutes longer than I wanted to go, but it was that good of a conversation.
Andy,
I cannot wait to have you back on the show. This was awesome.
My
I'm going to
pleasure.
be seeing you in a few days. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
Yep.
gonna be
Yep.
very fun. I don't know how much we can really talk about it, but we're gonna have some fun stuff to talk about soon. Maybe I'll have to bring you and some of our other friends back on to recap whatever the hell that's gonna be in a few days. That'll be
Let's see
fun.
what
But thank
happens
you
to our
so much.
legacies after next weekend.
Yeah, right. How is this gonna affect our legacy? Don't worry, folks. We're gonna clue everybody in on what we're talking about in about a week's time. So I'm very excited for that. Andy, thank you for giving me some time tonight, man. This was awesome. Anytime I get to chat with you is awesome, especially when we're talking the greatest game in the history of the world. Folks, be sure to follow me, Instagram, Twitter, at Gabe Ortiz. Subscribe to the Reality After Show. Hit that little bell so you're alerted. Follow Andy. Andy's on Twitter again. Who
Back
would
on
have thought?
Twitter.
Andy
Yeah.
is back on Twitter. What's your handle if people want to follow you?
I believe it's
Just
Andy
Andy
Ruetta.
Ruetta?
I believe maybe. Wait, hold on. Let's get this right. Let's get this right. It could be have
Andy
my middle
D.
initials
Ruetta.
stuck in there. Andy D. Ruetta. That's my middle initial.
Andy, the letter D Ruetta. Give Andy a follow. He's tweeting Big Brother. It's a great time. As somebody who is very new to the Big Brother space, as watching their first full season from beginning to end, he's a must follow. So if you want good, funny Big Brother content, go give Andy a follow. Give him a follow on Instagram as well. Always posting cool stuff over there. Folks, we'll see you next week.